From May 10th to 11th, 2025, China and the United States held their first high-level face-to-face talks in Geneva, Switzerland, since the start of the latest round of tariff battles. The Chinese delegation was led by Vice Premier He Lifeng, while the U.S. team was led by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. The talks drew global attention due to the powerful lineup from both sides. On the morning of May 12th, both countries released a joint statement about the Geneva talks. They agreed to reduce the tariffs imposed on each other since April 2nd by 115%, keeping only 10% in place. This move is aimed at pushing negotiations forward. All previous tariffs remain unchanged. In effect, after all the back and forth, China has ended up back at the starting point of responding to Trump's trade war. The joint statement also clarified the current tariff levels. The U.S. keeps a 50% tariff on Chinese goods, while China keeps just 10% on American goods. This reflects the power imbalance and different strategies each side is using in the trade war. America's 50% tariff is made up of three parts: a 10% base tariff set on April 2nd, two fentanyl-related tariffs of 10% each added on February 1st and March 3rd, and the original 20% tariff from the 2018 trade war under Section 301. This structure shows that the U.S. has kept all of its punitive tariffs in place and hasn't made any real concessions. These high tariffs put serious cost pressure on Chinese exports, especially in manufacturing and consumer goods. Meanwhile, China has only kept a 10% tariff on U.S. goods and hasn't introduced any new retaliatory measures. During the 2018 trade war, China did apply retaliatory tariffs on U.S. products, but many of those were later removed because China depends heavily on importing certain essential materials and technologies. The statement admitted that adding tariffs on imports could hurt China's own economy. This reveals a structural weakness in China's manufacturing-heavy economy. It relies too much on foreign imports and can't use tariffs effectively to push back. In reality, China isn't even capable of applying strong counter-tariffs. It's worth noting that if the two countries fail to reach a new agreement within the next 90 days, the U.S. will impose another 24% tariff on Chinese goods. This round of talks is very different from the ones 7 years ago. The gap between a 50% U.S. tariff and a 10% Chinese tariff shows that China has backed down. The U.S. not only kept high tariffs, but also held onto the threat of an additional 24% increase in 90 days. If that happens, China could be facing a total of 74% tariffs. But none of the core problems between the two countries have been resolved. The road ahead for these negotiations will still be very difficult. A financial commentator said they were shocked to see the Chinese government accept such terms. They believe there's no hope for meaningful progress in the upcoming talks. The Trump administration's demands are clear. China must open its markets and remove restrictions. Trump himself has repeated this point many times. If there are still areas of China's economy that remain closed, they're almost certainly not going to open. Areas like telecom and online platforms. Google, X, and YouTube are simply never going to be allowed into China. Because of that, the two sides are unlikely to ever reach a real deal. For now, the humiliating 50% versus 10% tariff situation will last for 90 days, and after that, it could become an even more humiliating 74% versus 10%. Just before the talks began, there were already signs that the trade war was heating up. On May 7th, the U.S. Department of Commerce announced new anti-dumping duties on Chinese-made thermoformed molded fiber products. The tax rate is a staggering 477.97%. Along with the anti-dumping duties, the U.S. also launched a countervailing duty investigation into the same Chinese products. Vietnam was also affected by the anti-dumping ruling, but its companies were hit with much lower taxes, from just 0.76% to 211.6%, still far below China's. This move follows the U.S. government's April 22nd decision to impose anti-dumping and countervailing duties on crystalline silicon photovoltaic cells from 4 Southeast Asian countries: Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Whether it's targeting solar panels from Southeast Asia or launching this latest round of tariffs on thermoformed molded fiber products from China, the lists published by the U.S. Department of Commerce clearly show who they're aiming at: Chinese manufacturing and China's export sector. According to the schedule released by the Department of Commerce, these anti-dumping duties on molded fiber products could take effect as early as September 8th this year, once the U.S. International Trade Commission makes its final ruling. China's molded pulp packaging sector is heavily dependent on overseas markets. Nearly all single-use packaging products, like takeout containers, are exported to the U.S. and EU, so this move by the U.S. could deal a serious blow to China's pulp molded packaging industry. Data from Chinese customs shows that in 2024, China imported $8.07 billion worth of plastic and plastic products from the U.S., for which they paid $23 billion US. This trade advantage mainly comes from China's lower production costs and economies of scale, but the high tariffs could start to change that, especially in the plastic sector. Thermoformed molded fiber products include disposable items like plates, bowls, cups, and fruit trays used in food services. They also include electronic product packaging, auto parts protection materials, and items used in industrial and agricultural sectors, such as transport trays and seedling trays. High tariffs on specific goods are both an economic weapon and a bargaining chip. By hitting carefully chosen categories, the U.S. is directly threatening China export-driven industries. These targeted strikes reduce China's leverage in retaliation and are being used to pressure China into major concessions in the Geneva talks. These higher tariffs have already started to impact China's exports. According to the New York Times, in the first quarter of 2025, China exported $10.27 billion worth of goods to the U.S. That's just 11% of total U.S. imports, a sharp drop from the 22% 7 years ago, and the lowest level in 2 decades. This shows that the impact of tariffs is spreading through supply chains and eroding China's market share. In response, China has stepped up its messaging. The Chinese Foreign Ministry released a video titled "We Won't Kneel," saying that bowing to U.S. pressure would only lead to deeper crises. The message was clear: China will not kneel and it will not back down. Some political analysts say Xi Jinping's tough stance is meant to push the U.S. to compromise while also strengthening support at home. It has now been a month since the U.S. launched this round of the trade war under the banner of reciprocal tariffs. On Chinese social media, most content supports the government's hardline stance against the U.S., while ignoring the real struggles of exporters. Even business owners whose livelihoods have been shattered will end their videos by saying, "Even though my business has taken a hit, I will still fully support the government's decision to fight back." Some online influencers are taking advantage of the situation by spreading false claims like China is winning in foreign trade. This only increases misinformation and could lead others into risky or illegal actions like underreporting shipments. In response, some exporters have posted videos to expose the truth behind the scenes.
Trump's tariff war has pushed this year's Canton Fair to a new high. Nearly 170,000 overseas buyers registered, up about 20% from last year. Traders got excited again, but when I looked at the numbers more closely, I saw problems. 72% of the foreign buyers came from the Belt and Road countries, while only 10.5% were from Europe and the US. The expected deal value this year is around 25 to 26 billion US dollars, just slightly higher than last year's 24.05 billion, which itself was only 1% higher than the year before. The rise in visitor numbers isn't something to celebrate. There are more buyers, but the total value of deals hasn't increased, which means there are fewer high-value clients from the West and more low-value clients from developing countries. So even though the event looked popular, it doesn't mean the quality of orders improved. Online influencers who exaggerate China's trade success are partially to blame. There are 3 problems. First, because of US tariffs and EU investigations, China has no choice but to rely more on Belt and Road markets. But those markets mostly want low-value goods and can't make up for the loss of Western orders. Second, Western countries are shifting to nearshoring and offshoring. For example, Mexico has replaced China as America's top trading partner. Belt and Road countries may help absorb China's output, but their demand is focused on basic goods and building materials. Third, I'm warning so-called trade trainers to stop pretending to be experts, saying they're misleading desperate business owners.
Many vloggers say that a lot of people in foreign trade are making crazy profits because of the US-China tariff war. I find it strange how this news spread. Let me tell you the truth. They have you disassemble the products into raw materials, then attach intellectual property rights to them. For example, for our table, I disassemble it into wood, then report the wood as raw materials priced at 10%, and the intellectual property rights at 90%. Can this really make money? Let me tell you, it's a huge trap. First, the customs are not not that stupid. If the declared value is too low, for example, if the product normally sells for $10 and you declare it as 1 penny, this is considered underreporting. If you get caught, the penalty could bankrupt you. You and your clients will both face the consequences. Many freight forwarders go bankrupt because of underreporting and tax evasion. Second, can you disassemble it into parts? Yes, but there is a problem. Who will reassemble it? Will the client find someone to do the assembly? If the labor cost is slightly lower, will they assemble it in China? There are also people who say that U.S. orders are being shipped normally. Products that are being shipped normally are the ones urgently needed and already paid for, while with other products like consumer goods, they either try to stop making the goods or purchase them from other countries because no one wants to lose money. So don't try to chase these hot trends. State media and social platforms have been pushing a narrative that China is winning the trade war, or that decoupling is a success. They use slogans like, "We can entertain ourselves behind closed doors." These stories stir up nationalism, but cover up the real economic risks, which are becoming more visible. Trade experts are warning the public to watch out for fake online content. Tricks like shipping as parts or undervaluing goods may sound clever, but come with high legal risks and could result in large fines or even criminal charges. The U.S. has now raised tariffs on Chinese imports to at least 145%. That's a shocking rate and has nearly paralyzed trade between the two countries. This is a huge blow to China's e-commerce and consumer goods exporters. In recent years, cross-border e-commerce made up 60 to 70% of China's air freight volume. But under the new tariff policy, which took effect on May 2nd, packages from China and Hong Kong are no longer tax-exempt. They now require full customs clearance and a 145% tariff. According to consulting firm Cirrus Global Advisors, this will likely reduce Chinese shipments to the U.S. by about 90%. Since e-commerce depends heavily on air delivery, the air freight industry is taking a direct hit. According to data quoted by financial news site Caixin, from May 1st to May 7th, full cargo flights between China and the U.S. dropped by about half. There were 46 flights on May 1st, then 32 on May 2nd, and just 28 by May 7th. In April, the average was 65.8 flights per day. A Zhejiang airport official said that almost all U.S. cargo flights have stopped. Air freight rates have dropped to about 20 yuan per kilogram. In May, only 3 full cargo flights left for the U.S., on the 1st, 2nd, and 8th. Another air freight operator said that most chartered U.S. cargo flights for May have been canceled, and there's very little capacity left. Caixin reports that China-U.S. cargo flight volumes were already shrinking before the latest tariff hikes. For the week ending April 27th, tonnage from China and Hong Kong, headed for the U.S., was down 15% year-on-year. Spot freight rates across the Asia-Pacific also dropped 2% to $3.7 per kilogram that week. Consulting firm Cirrus Global Advisors, which specializes in e-commerce and logistics, says China's parcel shipments to the U.S. are expected to drop by around 90% due to the 145% tariff. However, it's important to note that this rate is now on hold after the U.S. and China met in Geneva on May 11th. Industry analysts warn that this shift in duty-free policy for small parcels, along with changes in cross-border e-commerce models, will seriously impact China's airline cargo business. Airlines with a high share of e-commerce goods on China-U.S. routes may face both a drop in cargo volume and lower freight rates in the short term. The sea freight market is also under pressure from excess capacity and falling prices. Many shipping containers are now stuck at Chinese ports, filled with goods that can no longer be sold in the U.S. due to tariffs. Cargo bookings for U.S.-China container shipping have dropped by half. In factory towns along China's coast, tens of thousands of workers have been laid off. Industries like textiles, toys, electronics, and furniture are struggling. Streets are empty, and shops are shutting down. The U.S. is China's largest export customer, buying about 1/6 of China's total exports. If the tariffs remain in place, economists estimate that 80% of Chinese goods may no longer be able to enter the U.S. market, potentially causing losses of up to $400 billion US. On May 9th, Reuters reported that China and the U.S. held closed-door talks in Geneva to try to ease the dispute. After a wave of canceled orders, Chinese freight agents have started booking container space again to ship goods to the U.S. According to the report, 4 Chinese exporters said they plan to resume shipments to the U.S. in the coming weeks. Some of them supply major American retailers like Walmart. Ms. Liu said, "We're all hoping the tariff situation will ease in May. I believe it will." The report also cited 2 senior executives at Chinese freight companies who said that since late April, traders have increased their container bookings, targeting shipments beginning in mid-May. According to the latest figures from China's General Administration of Customs, exports to the U.S. fell 21% year-on-year in April, the largest drop since July 2023. With air freight capacity cut in half and sea orders canceled, continued pressure could lead to widespread job losses and business closures. That may trigger public dissatisfaction and pose a challenge to Xi Jinping's political legitimacy. Some economists have criticized the Chinese government's confrontational approach. They say that for the U.S., this trade war may only bring temporary inflation, but for Chinese citizens, it's a disaster. They argue that no reasonable government should ignore the livelihood of its people just to save face. Chinese economists warn that even under the most optimistic outlook, China's exports will fall by at least 10%. With excess production redirected to the domestic market, a brutal price war could break out, posing a serious survival challenge for many companies. He described this as a battle over China's national fate, saying, "This is a global upheaval. I believe many export companies are about to face catastrophic challenges very soon." Business professor Xie Qian of the University of South Carolina said, "The next step could be the shutdown of tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of factories, affecting tens of millions of workers. When you add the service sector, which employs tens of millions more, we could be looking at several tens of millions of people losing their jobs." He emphasized that the trade war is delivering a huge blow to China's economy and to the Chinese Communist Party. He pointed out that the CCP has now lost the steady stream of profits and trade surplus it relied on. This will affect its ability to fund projects like the Belt and Road Initiative, military expansion, and its use of high-tech tools to suppress and monitor its own population. In his view, Trump's tariffs are not just economic, they also weaken the foundation of CCP rule. Stephen Mosher, president of the Population Research Institute, wrote that as millions of people lose their jobs, it's only a matter of time before they take to the streets. While Beijing's officials continue to publicly claim that they're not afraid of a trade war with the U.S. and that the Chinese people can bear anything, behind closed doors they worry that something like the 1989 Tiananmen protests could happen again.